The crystal champagne flute felt like ice in her trembling hand. Across the opulent ballroom, her ex-husband Preston was laughing, his arm draped around his new bride. Just moments ago, that bride had stood on stage and in front of 300 of New York's elite called her out by name, mocking her second-hand dress and the quiet, simple life she now lived. The room's pity was a physical weight pressing down, suffocating her. They all saw her as the pathetic first wife, the starter chapter in Preston's grand novel. But they have no idea about the story's final shocking twist. They don't know who she really is. And in about 5 minutes, their entire world, and especially Preston's, is going to detonate. Stay with me to witness the most satisfying wedding demolition you will ever hear. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday. It wasn't delivered by a normal postal worker, but by a courier, the kind that requires a signature and makes you feel important even if you're standing in the peeling hallway of a fourth-floor walk-up in Queens. Audrina Shaw signed the digital pad, her hand steady, but her heart had already begun a frantic, painful rhythm against her ribs. The envelope was thick cream-colored cardstock, impossibly heavy. The edges were lined in gold leaf, and her name was calligraphed in an elegant looping script that she recognized instantly. It was Bianca Montgomery's handwriting. Even the ink seemed to mock her. Inside the card was a masterpiece of passive aggression. Mr. and Mrs. Robert Montgomery request the honor of your presence at the marriage of their daughter Bianca to Mr. Preston Vanderbilt. The wedding was to be held at the Oheka Castle on Long Island, a place so extravagant it was rumored to have inspired the Gatsby Mansion. The date was just 3 weeks away. Tucked inside was a smaller, more personal note on matching stationery. Audrina, it read, I know this might be awkward, but Preston and I truly feel that your presence would mean the world. It would signify true closure and prove there are no hard feelings. We've all moved on to better things, haven't we? Please say you'll come. B. Audrina sank onto her worn velvet armchair, the one she'd found on the curb, and reupholstered herself. The note was a dagger wrapped in silk. Every word was a calculated jab. Awkward. Closure. No hard feelings. And the final brutal twist of the knife. We've all moved on to better things. Her life with Preston had been a 5-year lesson in gradual erasure. She had met him at a small gallery opening where he, a struggling painter, was showcasing his work. She was working part-time at the New York Public Library, finding solace in the quiet hum of the reading rooms, deliberately living a life far removed from the one she had fled. He was charming and tense, and saw in her what he wanted to see: a blank canvas. A pretty, intelligent girl with no family to speak of. No connections, no ambition that could possibly overshadow his own. She had loved him, or at least she'd loved the man she thought he was. She supported him completely. Her modest librarian salary paid for their tiny Brooklyn apartment, his expensive oil paints, his canvases, his tailored clothes that made him look the part of the successful artist he so desperately wanted to be. She cooked his meals, cleaned his studio, and was his ever-present silent cheerleader at every gallery show where his work was inevitably overlooked. The cracks began to show slowly then, all at once. His frustration with his stalled career was never his fault. It was hers. If you just had better connections, Audrina, he'd say, swirling a glass of cheap wine she'd bought. If your family wasn't a complete void, we could be networking. Do you have any idea how much easier it would be if I could just mention your father's name at one of these events? She would remain silent. He knew nothing of her father or her grandfather. She had told him she was an orphan raised in the system, a story that was simple and tragic enough to stop further questions. It was a lie, but it was a necessary shield. The truth was far more complicated and far more dangerous to the quiet life she was trying to build. He started belittling her job. A librarian. It's so quaint. So small. Don't you want more for yourself, for us? He mocked her clothes, which were always neat and clean, but from thrift stores or discount racks. He'd point out women on the street. Look at her bag. That's a Bottega Veneta. That's what success looks like. It's about presentation, Audrina. Something you've never understood. The final blow came in the form of Bianca Montgomery. Bianca's father was a mid-level investment banker, not fabulously wealthy by New York standards, but with enough money and a wide enough social circle to make Preston's eyes gleam with avarice. Bianca was everything Audrina wasn't: loud, immaculately dressed in designer labels, dripping with an entitlement that she wore like expensive perfume. She met Preston at a gallery, and within a week she was funding his new studio space in Chelsea. The divorce was swift and brutal. Preston told her he needed someone who could operate on his level, someone who understood the mechanics of success. He made her feel like a failure, a weight he was finally shrugging off so he could soar. He took everything, the few pieces of art she'd actually liked, the nicer furniture she'd painstakingly restored, and her dignity. He left her with the worn-out armchair and a mountain of self-doubt. Now, holding this invitation, she felt the old wounds ache. Why invite her? It wasn't for closure. It was a victory lap. They wanted a front-row seat for her humiliation. They wanted to parade their new glossy life in front of the drab, discarded one. They wanted to see her flinch. For 2 days she debated. Part of her wanted to burn the invitation, to block their numbers, to disappear completely. But another part, a small, resilient ember that Preston had never managed to extinguish, began to glow. What if she went? What if she faced them not as the mousy librarian they remembered, but as herself? What if she showed them that she was not broken, not sad, not even remotely impressed? The decision solidified on the 3rd day. She was rereading the note, and the phrase, "We've all moved on to better things," snagged in her mind. It was true. She had moved on. In the year since the divorce, she had slowly started to piece her life back together. And she had, after years of silence, reconnected with the one person she had run away from. She picked up her phone and made a call. "Hello?" A gruff, familiar voice answered. Grandfather Audrina said, her voice clearer and stronger than it had been in years. "It's me." A pause, then Audrina. "I was wondering when you'd tire of playing peasant." "I'm not tired of it," she replied calmly. "But I've been invited to a wedding. My ex-husband's. I think it's time I stopped hiding." She could almost hear the slow, calculating smile forming on the other end of the line. "Oh," her grandfather Cormac Kensington purred. "Do tell me more." She told him everything, about Preston, about Bianca, about the invitation. She didn't have to explain the subtext. He understood power and cruelty better than anyone. When she finished, there was a long silence. "So this little painter thinks he discarded a stone." Cormac finally said, his voice laced with cold fury, when all along he was holding a diamond. "We can't have that. People need to learn the value of things. What do you need from me, child?" "Nothing," Audrina said. "I don't want your money or your power to crush them. I just want to go hold my head high and leave. I need to do it for myself." "Admirable, but insufficient," Cormac retorted. "You will go. You will hold your head high. But you will not go as Audrina Shaw, the librarian. You will go as my granddaughter. And you will not just leave. You will make an exit that they will talk about for a generation. Jonathan will handle the details. Just tell him what you require." Jonathan Davenport was her grandfather's right-hand man, the family's chief counsel and fixer. He was more terrifying than a platoon of soldiers. After the call, Audrina walked to her small closet. She pushed past the sensible cardigans and practical blouses until her fingers brushed against a garment bag at the very back. Inside was a dress she hadn't worn in years. A simple, elegant, slate-gray sheath dress. It was understated, almost plain, but she knew the label sewn into the silk lining: Chanel. It was the last gift her grandmother had given her. It was a dress of quiet confidence, of hidden strength. It was perfect. She would go to the wedding. She would wear this dress. She would play the part of the humble ex-wife. And she would let Preston and Bianca have their moment of triumph. Because the best performances, she knew, saved the final stunning reveal for the 3rd act. The drive out to Oheka Castle was a journey into another world. Audrina had taken the Long Island Railroad to a nearby town, and then a taxi, a deliberate choice to arrive like the commoner they expected her to be. As the taxi wound its way up the long gravel driveway, the castle loomed into view, a French-style chateau of impossible size and grandeur. Manicured gardens stretched for acres dotted with classical statues and bubbling fountains. Valets in crisp uniforms were whisking away Bentleys and Rolls-Royces. It was a monument to new money's desperate attempt to look like old money. It was, in a word, Preston's paradise. Audrina paid the taxi driver her simple gray dress and small clutch feeling woefully inadequate amidst the sea of couture gowns and glittering jewels. She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and walked towards the grand entrance. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and money. She gave her name, Audrina Shaw, to the woman at the welcome table who had to scan down the guest list twice before finding it near the bottom. The woman's smile was tight with professional pity. Of course. Welcome. Stepping into the main hall was like stepping into a gilded cage. A string quartet played Vivaldi from a mezzanine, their music barely audible over the boisterous chatter of the guests. Waiters weaved through the crowd with trays of champagne and ludicrously small canapes. Everyone seemed to know everyone, air-kissing and laughing with a practiced hollow sound. The first person to spot her was Genevieve Vanderbilt Preston's mother. A woman sculpted from silicone and condescension, she was wearing a tight gold-sequined dress that was at least 2 decades too young for her. Her eyes, narrowed in a permanent state of disapproval, scanned Audrina from head to toe. Audrina. "My dear Genevieve," said her voice dripping with false sweetness. She glided over her bracelets, jangling. "How brave of you to come." Genevieve, Audrina replied with a calm, small smile. Preston and Bianca insisted. "It's a beautiful venue." Yes, well, Bianca has exquisite taste. Something Preston has finally come to appreciate in a partner. She said, her gaze flicking pointedly over Audrina's simple dress. "You're looking healthy." It was the kind of word one used to describe a rescued farm animal. "I'm very well." "Thank you," Audrina said, refusing to take the bait. Is that dress from that little vintage shop you used to love in the village?" Genevieve pressed, leaning in conspiratorially to an equally lacquered friend. She was always so wonderfully frugal. The friend, a woman named Bitsy, or Muffy Audrina couldn't recall, gave a tittering laugh. "Oh, how charming. It's so important to be resourceful, isn't it?" Audrina simply smiled and excused herself, moving deeper into the crowd. But it was the same everywhere she went. People who had known her when she was with Preston now looked at her with a mixture of morbid curiosity and disdain. Whispers followed her like a foul wind. Is that her, the first wife? My God, she actually came. Doesn't she have any pride? Look at her dress. It's positively funereal. Someone should tell her it's a wedding. Preston did so well for himself trading up. Bianca's family has a place in the Hamptons, you know. She found a quiet corner near a large window overlooking the gardens. She accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and held at the cold glass a small anchor in the overwhelming sea of hostility. This was harder than she'd imagined. It wasn't just about Preston and Bianca. It was the collective judgment of their entire social sphere. They had all bought into the narrative. Preston was the brilliant artist on the rise, and she was the dead weight he'd had the good sense to cut loose. Then she saw him. Preston was holding court near the grand staircase, looking insufferably pleased with himself. He was wearing a custom Tom Ford tuxedo, his hair perfectly coiffed. He wasn't a struggling artist anymore. He was a brand. And Bianca was his prize acquisition. She was standing beside him, radiant in a Vera Wang gown that must have cost more than Audrina's annual salary. Her diamond necklace caught the light of the chandeliers, scattering tiny, sharp rainbows across the room. Their eyes met across the crowd. Preston's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a flicker of surprise that she had actually shown up. Then it was replaced by a look of pure, smug satisfaction. He excused himself from his circle and started making his way towards her with Bianca on his arm. The shark was coming to inspect the bait. "Audrina." "You came," Preston said, his voice smooth and patronizing. "I'm so glad." "You invited me," she said simply, her gaze even. Bianca's smile was as bright and hard as her diamonds. "We're thrilled. It's just so mature of everyone, don't you think? It shows there's no bitterness." She looked Audrina up and down, a slow, deliberate appraisal. "That's a lovely dress. Very understated." "Thank you, Bianca. Congratulations to you both. You seem very happy," Audrina said, the picture of grace. Her composure seemed to annoy them. They had been expecting tears or a scene. "Oh, we are," Preston gushed, pulling Bianca closer. "It's amazing what can happen when your partner is a true equal. Someone who inspires you, who pushes you to be your best self. Bianca's father just connected me with a gallery owner in Zurich. We're talking about a solo show next spring." It was a direct hit, a reminder of all the times he'd lamented her lack of connections. Audrina just nodded. "That's wonderful news, Preston. And what about you?" Bianca chimed in, her voice syrupy sweet. "Still at the library, stamping books and shushing people. It must be so peaceful." "There's a lot to be said for peace," Audrina replied, taking a small sip of her champagne. Their attack wasn't working. Her refusal to be baited, her calm dignity, was like a shield they couldn't penetrate. So Preston went for a lower blow. "You know," he said, leaning in as if sharing a secret, "I was worried about you after the split. I know things must be tight. If you ever need anything seriously, don't let pride get in the way. I'd be happy to help you out, for old time's sake." He was offering her charity. In front of his new bride, in front of this whole crowd of gawkers who were pretending not to listen. It was the ultimate power play, casting himself as the benevolent, successful man and her as the pitiful charity case. This was the moment to let her mask slip, to let the fire she was holding back flare up. But she didn't. She held his gaze, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes, and said, "That's very generous of you, Preston. But I'm fine. Truly, you should get back to your guests. It's your big day." She turned her gaze to Bianca. "May your life together be everything you deserve." She delivered the line with such sincerity that it took a moment for the double meaning to land. She watched them walk away, Preston looking slightly confused, Bianca preening. They thought they had won this round. They had paraded their success and her supposed failure, and she had taken it with a quiet smile. They had no idea that her calm was not submission. It was the eerie, silent stillness before a tsunami. The ceremony was about to begin. Guests were ushered from the grand hall into a vast, sun-drenched conservatory for the ceremony. The room was a fantasy of white. Thousands of white roses and orchids were woven into arches and hung in fragrant garlands from the ceiling. A white aisle runner stretched between rows of chairs draped in white silk, leading to a small elevated platform where Preston and the officiant stood waiting. It was beautiful, sterile, and suffocatingly pretentious. Audrina found a seat at the very back, hoping to remain as inconspicuous as possible. But there was no hiding. She could feel the stares, the whispers slithering through the rows. She was a ghost at the feast, a living embodiment of the past that everyone was here to celebrate, leaving behind. The string quartet began playing Pachelbel's canon, the universal signal for a wedding to commence. The guests rose. Down the aisle came Bianca on the arm of her flushed, beaming father. She was a vision of bridal perfection. Her dress, with its intricate lacework and long train, was a masterpiece. Her veil was held in place by a diamond tiara. She looked like a princess from a fairy tale. A very smug, very cruel princess. When she reached the altar, Preston took her hand, his eyes shining with an emotion that Audrina knew all too well. It wasn't love. It was acquisition. He was looking at Bianca the way he looked at a painting he'd just sold for a high price, a symbol of his own elevated status. The ceremony was traditional, filled with readings about love and partnership that felt hollow and false, coming from the mouths of friends who had witnessed Preston's casual cruelty to Audrina for years. Audrina kept her face a placid mask, her hands clasped loosely in her lap. She wasn't mourning the loss of Preston. She was mourning the years she had lost to him, the pieces of herself she had given away to a man who saw her as nothing more than a temporary inconvenience. Then came the vows. Bianca went first, her voice clear and strong, reciting a promise she had clearly memorized. "Preston, my love," she began, her eyes locked on his. "From the moment I met you, I knew you were a man of vision, a man destined for greatness. I saw a fire in you that the world had not yet recognized. I am so honored to be the woman who can finally give you the platform you deserve, to be the wind beneath your wings, and to build a life with you that is as beautiful and as grand as your art. I promise to be your partner, your champion, and your muse, forever and ever." The subtext was as subtle as a sledgehammer. I am the one who recognizes your greatness. I am the one giving you the platform. It was a vow not to a partner, but to a project. Then it was Preston's turn. He cleared his throat, pulling a small card from his pocket, though he barely glanced at it. His words were for Bianca, but his eyes kept flicking almost involuntarily towards the back of the room where Audrina sat. "Bianca," he said, his voice thick with performative emotion, "I feel like my whole life was in black and white before you. I was walking through a fog trying to create art with a muted palette. I didn't know what was missing, but I knew I was constrained, held back. You came into my life like a burst of color, a vibrant, brilliant light. You showed me what was possible when you have a partner who truly believes in your dream and isn't afraid of success. You've unlocked my potential. With you, I'm not just an artist. I'm a force. You have saved me from a life of quiet mediocrity, and for that I will love you and cherish you for all of my days." The venom was exquisitely aimed. Every word was a poisoned dart meant for Audrina. Muted palette, constrained, held back, quiet mediocrity. He was recasting their entire life together as her fault, a gray prison from which Bianca had liberated him. He was publicly shaming Audrina for the very qualities he had once claimed to love: her quiet nature, her simple life, her lack of interest in the glitzy world he now so desperately craved. A single hot tear slid down Audrina's cheek. It wasn't a tear of heartbreak for him. It was a tear of anger for the woman she had been, the woman who had absorbed those insults for years and believed on some level that they were true. It was a tear of mourning for her own lost self-worth. She wiped it away quickly and discreetly. No one would see her cry. Not here. Not today. The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur of I do's and a theatrical kiss that drew loud applause from the audience. As the newlyweds walked back down the aisle, beaming and waving, Preston's eyes found Audrina one last time. He gave her a small, tight smile, a final look of triumph. "See," the look said. "This is what I am. This is what you lost." But as Audrina met his gaze, she felt a profound shift inside her. The last vestiges of pain and self-doubt were burning away, replaced by a cold, clear certainty. He hadn't seen her. He had never seen her. He had looked right at her for 5 years and had seen only a reflection of his own inadequacies. He hadn't lost anything because he never had her in the first place. He had possessed a shadow, a carefully constructed persona. And he had no idea what was waiting for him when the real Audrina finally decided to step into the light. The reception, she knew, was going to be a night to remember. The reception was held in the castle's main ballroom, a cavernous space with a gold-leaf ceiling, towering arched windows, and a marble floor polished to a mirror shine. The opulence was nauseating. A 10-piece band was playing swing music and the champagne was flowing like water. Audrina found her assigned table, and to no one's surprise, it was in the farthest, darkest corner of the room, next to the swinging doors of the kitchen. Table 23. It was filled with a smattering of Bianca's distant cousins and a few of Preston's old art school acquaintances who looked just as uncomfortable as she felt. Social Siberia. She politely endured the dinner, pushing a piece of Chilean sea bass around her plate and making small talk with a dental hygienist from Buffalo. All the while she watched the head table. Preston and Bianca were the king and queen of their own gaudy prom, laughing, kissing for the cameras, soaking in the adoration of their court. After the main course, the clinking of a spoon against a glass signaled the start of the speeches. Bianca's father went first, delivering a rambling, tearful tribute to his princess. Then came Preston's best man, a slick real estate broker named Todd, who had always treated Audrina with a sneering condescension. Todd took the microphone, a little unsteady from the champagne. "I've known Preston for a long time," he began, "and I've seen him through thick and thin. Mostly thin, if you know what I mean. A few scattered laughs. I saw him trying to create his masterpieces, trying to find his way. And for a while there he was. Let's just say he was painting with watercolors. Nice, quiet, faded little pictures." He paused, letting the insult hang in the air. Everyone who knew Audrina understood the reference. But then he met Bianca. And suddenly the man is working in vibrant, bold oils. His life is a masterpiece in progress. "Bianca, you didn't just marry a great artist, you saved one. Let's raise a glass to the happy couple." The room erupted in applause. Audrina felt the heat rise in her cheeks, but she kept her expression neutral, even clapping politely along with everyone else. Her composure was a fortress, and she would not let them see it crumble. But the main event was yet to come. After the best man's speech, Bianca stood up, took the microphone, and beamed at the crowd. "Thank you all so much for being here," she said, her voice dripping with saccharine emotion. "This is the happiest day of my life. I have my handsome, brilliant husband, my wonderful family, and all my amazing friends." Her eyes scanned the room, and then with theatrical precision, they landed on Audrina. Her smile widened. "And I have to give a special thank you to someone for being here tonight, someone whose presence is the ultimate symbol of moving on. Audrina Shaw." A hush fell over the ballroom. All heads swiveled towards table 23. This was it. The public execution. "Audrina, would you stand up for a moment? Please don't be shy." Audrina's blood ran cold. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to disappear. But she didn't. Slowly, deliberately, she rose to her feet. The spotlight that had been on the head table swung and found her, pinning her in its harsh white glare. She felt like an animal caught in the headlights. "There she is," Bianca cooed into the microphone. "When Preston and I decided to get married, we knew we had to invite Audrina. Because our story, our love story, is built on the foundations of the past. It's important to acknowledge that. And Audrina was such an important part of Preston's early phase." The condescension was palpable. "I know that since the divorce things have been different for you," Bianca continued, her voice now a symphony of fake sympathy. "A simpler life, a more modest existence. And we want you to know that we wish you nothing but the best. We're all winners here tonight." She gestured to a waiter who brought a small, beautifully wrapped gift box to the stage. "And because we feel so blessed, we wanted to give you a little something. A gesture. A wedding favor just for you to help you on your new path." Bianca took the box, walked off the stage, and glided through the tables until she stood directly in front of Audrina. The silence in the room was absolute. 300 pairs of eyes were fixed on them. With a flourish, Bianca handed the box to Audrina. "Go on," she whispered loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "Open it." Audrina's hands were shaking, but she opened the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of tissue paper, was not a piece of jewelry or a keepsake. It was a gift card, a $50 gift card to Marshall's, the discount department store. And tucked beside it was a bus pass for the New York City MTA. A collective gasp went through the room, followed by a wave of snickers and horrified whispers. It was an act of such calculated, breathtaking cruelty that even some of the more jaded guests looked uncomfortable. They had gifted her bus fare and a voucher for a bargain bin, a public declaration of her lowly status. Bianca leaned in close, her breath smelling of champagne and malice. "Now you can buy yourself a new dress for the next time you get an invitation you can't afford," she hissed, just for Audrina to hear. Preston watched from the head table, a smug, triumphant grin plastered on his face. This was his masterpiece, the ultimate humiliation of the woman who had failed to be enough for him. Audrina looked down at the gift card, then up at Bianca's sneering face. She looked at Preston, enthroned at the head table. She saw the pity, the scorn, the amusement on the faces around her. She was completely, utterly alone, stranded on an island of public shame. This was the moment they had been waiting for. They were waiting for her to burst into tears, to scream, to throw the box in Bianca's face, to run from the room in disgrace. She did none of those things. She took a slow, deep breath. She closed the box gently. And then she looked directly at Bianca and smiled. It was not a pained smile or a weak smile. It was a small, calm, and utterly terrifying smile. "Thank you, Bianca," Audrina said, her voice perfectly even and clear, though it carried a new steely resonance. "This is very thoughtful, but I think you and Preston may have overlooked a small detail in your party planning." Before Bianca could respond, a commotion started at the main entrance of the ballroom. The grand double doors swung open, not with a gentle push from a waiter, but with a decisive, authoritative force. The swing band faltered, the music dying in a confused squawk of a saxophone. Two men, impossibly large and dressed in identical severe black suits with earpieces, stepped into the room. They moved with the disciplined precision of Secret Service agents, their eyes scanning the crowd with a cold professional indifference. They flanked the entrance, creating a path, and into that path walked a man who changed the entire atmosphere of the room. He was in his late 60s, with a mane of silver hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. He wore a bespoke Savile Row suit that probably cost more than the entire wedding catering budget. He walked with a heavy silver-topped cane, but it was not a sign of weakness. It was a scepter. His presence radiated a power so immense and so old that it made the new money flashiness of the Vanderbilts and Montgomerys look like a child's tea party. He ignored the stunned bride and groom. He ignored the gawking guests. His cold blue eyes swept the room until they found the lone woman standing in the spotlight in the corner. He walked directly towards her, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous silence. He stopped in front of Audrina, his severe expression softening just a fraction. "Ms. Kensington," said Jonathan Davenport, Chief Legal Counsel for Kensington Global Industries. "I apologize for the delay. The helicopter had to be rerouted. Are you ready to leave?" The name hung in the air, a sonic boom that shattered the reality of everyone present. Kensington, not Shaw. Kensington, as in Cormac Kensington, the reclusive, legendary multi-billionaire tycoon. The kingmaker. The man who owned half of Manhattan. Audrina looked from Mr. Davenport's unwavering gaze to the utter slack-jawed shock on Bianca's face. She held up the small gift box. Almost, she said, her voice ringing with newfound authority. "First, I believe I have a wedding gift to present in return." The silence in the ballroom was no longer just quiet. It was a vacuum. Sound itself seemed too terrified to enter the space. Everyone was frozen, processing the name that had just been dropped like a bomb: Kensington. Preston Vanderbilt looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. His face, moments ago so smug and triumphant, had gone a sickly pale white. He half rose from his chair, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a deck. Bianca was similarly paralyzed, her perfectly made-up face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. Jonathan Davenport, a man whose very presence made CEOs and politicians tremble, stood deferentially beside Audrina, waiting. He carried a slim, expensive-looking leather attaché case. He glanced at Bianca and the pathetic gift box in Audrina's hand, his expression one of utter contempt. "Ms. Kensington," he prompted gently, his voice a low rumble that still managed to fill the entire hall. Audrina turned her full attention back to Bianca. The meek, wounded woman from moments ago was gone. In her place stood someone with an aura of unshakable power. Her posture was different, ramrod straight. Her eyes, which had been downcast and sad, were now sharp and piercing. She had not changed her dress or her hair, But she was an entirely different person. She was no longer Audrina Shaw, the librarian. She was Audrina Kensington, and she was in command. Bianca, Audrina said, her voice cool and measured. You said your love story was built on the foundations of the past. It's a very astute observation. More astute than you know. Preston was always very interested in foundations, in connections, in having a partner who could provide a platform. She took a step closer, and Bianca instinctively took a step back, as if Audrina were suddenly radiating an intense heat. For 5 years I paid for his studio. I bought his canvases. I funded the life he claimed to despise while he accused me of having no ambition of being from nothing. He wanted a partner with a name, with a family that could open doors. He looked at me every day and saw a dead end. Her gaze shifted from Bianca and swept across the room, finally landing on Preston, pinning him to his seat. You wanted color in your life, Preston. You wanted out of the quiet mediocrity. You hunted for wealth and status like a starving dog. The funny thing is, you had it all in your hands the entire time. You were just too blind and too arrogant to see it. She turned back to Mr. Davenport. Jonathan, if you would. With a crisp nod, Mr. Davenport placed his attaché case on the now empty table next to them. He snapped it open with 2 sharp clicks. The sound echoed like gunshots in the silent room. He didn't produce a weapon or a wad of cash. He produced a single thick folder made of stiff, formal-looking blue paper. He handed it not to Audrina, but directly to Preston, who was now stumbling toward them from the head table, his face a mess of confusion and terror. A wedding gift, Mr. Davenport announced in a voice that brooked no argument from Ms. Audrina Kensington. Preston's hands trembled as he took the folder. He fumbled with the clasp, his eyes darting wildly between Audrina and the impassive face of Mr. Davenport. He finally pulled out the sheaf of papers. The guests, now on their feet and craning their necks, could see the letterhead even from a distance. It belonged to one of the most powerful and ruthless law firms in New York City. What is this? Preston stammered. I believe the first document you're holding, Mr. Davenport explained calmly, is a default notice. For the $250,000 business loan you took out last year to fund your new gallery space. The one Bianca's father so generously co-signed. Bianca's father, Robert Montgomery, sputtered from the head table. That loan is in good standing. The first payment isn't due for another 6 months. It was in good standing, Mr. Davenport corrected smoothly, until approximately 1 hour ago. You see, the loan was issued by a smaller private investment bank, Sterling Finch. As of 4:00 p.m. yesterday, Sterling Finch was acquired in a private all-cash transaction by a subsidiary holding of Kensington Global Industries. As the new owners, we are exercising our contractual right to call in all outstanding debts deemed to be at high risk. And we deem Mr. Vanderbilt to be a very high risk. Preston's face went from white to a ghastly shade of green. You can't do that. Oh, but we can. And we have. The full amount plus interest and penalties is due Monday morning at 9:00 a.m. If you fail to pay, we will of course begin asset seizure proceedings immediately, starting with your charming new gallery. A wave of murmurs swept through the crowd. This was no longer just a personal drama, it was a financial execution. But that's not all, Audrina said, her voice cutting through the noise. Keep reading, Preston. His shaking hands sifted to the next document. It was a property deed. You'll recognize that address, Audrina continued. It's the building in Chelsea where your studio is. When you signed the lease, you told the landlord I was your wife, and that my non-existent family had assets that could guarantee the rent. You forged my signature on the guarantee forms. A little bit of fraud to get your foot in the door. I found out about it during the divorce, but decided not to press charges. I thought it was pathetic but harmless. She paused, letting the weight of his crimes settle in the air. However, my grandfather, he feels differently about fraud. The Kensington Real Estate Division bought that building 6 months ago. Your lease is hereby terminated effective immediately for breach of contract and fraudulent representation. The men standing at the door are not just here for my security. They are here to escort you from the premises after your party is over. Your belongings have already been boxed up and will be delivered to your new mother-in-law's residence." Now it was Bianca's turn to look physically ill. Her dream husband was not just a broke artist. He was a fraud, and he was being evicted on their wedding night. But Audrina wasn't finished. She saved the most devastating blow for last. And finally she said, her voice softening into an almost gentle tone which was somehow more chilling. "This beautiful wedding, this castle, the flowers, the 10-piece band, the catering, the champagne you've all been enjoying so much." She gestured around the magnificent ballroom. Oheka Castle is one of several luxury event venues managed by the Elysian Group, a hospitality portfolio. My grandfather acquired the Elysian Group 3 years ago. When Bianca's father called to book this venue and your names were mentioned, my grandfather's office was flagged immediately. We have been aware of this event for months. She looked directly at Robert Montgomery, whose face had crumpled in defeat. "All the invoices, Mr. Montgomery, the ones you thought were being paid from your accounts, they were rerouted. All of them. The deposits you paid were refunded to your bank this afternoon. Every single bill for the venue, the food, the orchestra, the staff, the security has been consolidated. Mr. Davenport has the final invoice right here." Mr. Davenport reached into the attaché case and produced a second document, a single terrifyingly long page. He handed it to the shell-shocked Preston. "The total comes to $487,652.14, Mr. Davenport announced with grim satisfaction. "Payable to Kensington Global. We find it only fair that you should be responsible for the cost of your own triumph, Mr. Vanderbilt. As a wedding gift, Ms. Kensington has instructed me not to charge interest for the first 24 hours. The room was utterly, profoundly silent. In the space of 5 minutes, Audrina had gone from the humiliated ex-wife to the architect of their complete and total annihilation. Preston Vanderbilt and his new bride were not just embarrassed. They were financially and socially ruined, saddled with over $750,000 in immediate debt, with no gallery, no studio, and a future built on nothing but lies. Audrina looked at the wreckage of their perfect day. She looked at Preston, who was staring at the invoice as if it were his own death sentence. She looked at Bianca, whose fairy tale wedding had just become a nightmare from which she would never wake. And for the first time all night, Audrina Kensington allowed herself a genuine, satisfied smile. The ballroom was a tableau of shock. Guests stood like statues, champagne glasses, half-raised canapes, forgotten on their plates. The only movement was Preston's chest heaving in ragged, panicked breaths as he stared at the papers in his hand, the proof of his life's utter implosion. Bianca had sunk into a nearby chair, her Vera Wang dress pooling around her like a shroud. Her face was a ruin of smeared mascara and broken dreams. Audrina surveyed the scene not with glee, but with a quiet final sense of closure. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming the narrative. For years, Preston had written her story, casting her as the meek, ambitionless, disposable character. Tonight she had ripped up his manuscript and published her own. She turned to leave. Her point made her power asserted. But Preston finally snapped out of his stupor. "Audrina, wait," he croaked, stumbling toward her. His face was a desperate, pleading mask. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the raw terror of a man who had just lost everything. "You can't do this. Audrina, please. I didn't know. I swear I never knew." Audrina stopped and turned to face him one last time. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and felt nothing. No anger, no love, no pity. Just a vast, empty space where her feelings for him used to be. "That's the point, Preston," she said, her voice soft but unforgiving. "You never knew. You never once asked about my past, about my family, about who I really was. You didn't want a person. You wanted a prop. And when the prop didn't suit your ambitions, you threw it away. I loved you." He cried a pathetic, transparent lie. "We can fix this. I'll leave her. We can go back." A short, sharp laugh escaped Audrina's lips. It was a sound no one in the room had ever heard from her before. It was the sound of freedom. Go back. There's nothing to go back to. The woman you were married to doesn't exist anymore. You saw to that. You should be grateful. She gestured towards the weeping Bianca. You said it yourself in your vows. She saved you from a life of quiet mediocrity. Now you can build your beautiful grand life together. Starting from a negative balance of about $800,000. Good luck with your Zurich art show. With that final devastating cut, she turned her back on him for good. Jonathan, she said, her voice ringing with authority. Let's go. I have a board meeting in Geneva on Monday, and I'd like to get some rest. Mr. Davenport nodded. The helicopter is waiting at the East Hampton airfield, Ms. Kensington. The car is out front. As they walked toward the grand doors, the crowd parted for them as if they were royalty. The whispers were different now. They were not whispers of pity, but of awe and terror. They were witnessing the public birth of a new power player and the spectacular death of a social climber. As she passed the head table, her eyes briefly met those of Genevieve Vanderbilt. Preston's mother looked as if she had aged 30 years in the last 10 minutes. Her face was slack with horror, the gold sequins of her dress looking cheap and garish in the suddenly harsh light. Audrina and Mr. Davenport swept out of the ballroom, leaving a crater of social and financial ruin in their wake. The two large security men fell into step behind them, escorting them through the now silent halls of the castle. Outside, the cool night air was a relief. A black, gleaming Rolls-Royce Phantom was purring silently at the bottom of the grand steps, a chauffeur holding the door open. This was a different world from the Queen's Walk-Up and the Long Island Railroad. It was the world she had been born into, and the world she was now ready to command. As she settled into the plush leather of the back seat, Mr. Davenport handed her a sleek satellite phone. Your grandfather is on the line, ma'am. Audrina took the phone. Hello, grandfather. Cormac Kensington's gruff voice filled the receiver, but it was laced with a warmth she hadn't heard in years. Jonathan tells me the party was a success. You could say that, Audrina replied, a small smile playing on her lips as she watched the turrets of Oheka Castle recede in the distance. Good, Cormac said. It is one thing to have power, Audrina. It is another thing entirely to know how and when to use it. You did not use a sledgehammer. You used a scalpel. You have your grandmother's precision. I'm proud of you. Those words, I'm proud of you, meant more to her than all the billions in his bank accounts. They were the validation she had secretly craved her entire life. The estrangement between them had been born from her desire to live a normal life, and his fury at her for wasting her potential on a man like Preston. He had been right about Preston, but she had needed to learn that lesson on her own. I'm sorry, grandfather, she said, her voice catching slightly, for the lost time, for being so stubborn. Nonsense, he barked, though without his usual anger. The Kensington blood is stubborn. You've returned. That's all that matters. Now about that Geneva board meeting. I've had them clear my schedule. I'll be joining you. There are a few wolves on the board who need to be reminded who runs the company. It's time they met the new alpha. A sense of purpose, clean and bright, washed over Audrina. She wasn't just an heiress anymore. She wasn't just a victim who had gotten her revenge. She was stepping into her legacy. The years of living as Audrina Shaw, the quiet librarian, had not been a waste. They had taught her empathy. They had taught her what it was like to be invisible, to be underestimated. They had forged a core of steel beneath her quiet exterior. Preston had thought he was marrying a simple blank canvas, but he had unknowingly been living with a queen in exile. As the car sped through the night towards the waiting helicopter, Audrina looked out at the lights of Long Island. She had walked into that wedding as a ghost from the past. She was leaving as the architect of the future. Her future. And it was going to be brilliant. The Gulfstream G700 cut through the night sky, a vessel of silent power carrying Audrina from the ashes of her old life toward her future. The chaos of the wedding already felt a world away. While news alerts on her tablet buzzed with the explosive fallout, the Vanderbilt-Montgomery Union, already a synonym for social and financial ruin, Audrina ignored them. Revenge had been a door she needed to close. She had no interest in lingering in the hallway. Instead, she spent the transatlantic flight devouring the financial reports for a board meeting in Geneva, her mind sharp-focused and hungry. Her grandfather, Cormac Kensington, met her in Geneva. Seeing him, she saw not just family, but the weight of a legacy she was now prepared to claim. He led her into a boardroom filled with skeptical, powerful men. "Ladies and gentlemen," Cormac announced, his voice echoing off the polished mahogany, "my granddaughter, Audrina Kensington, will be taking my seat on this board, effective today." A German industrialist, Klaus von Hesse, scoffed. "With all due respect, Cormac, what experience does she bring?" Audrina stepped forward before her grandfather could speak. Her voice was calm and cut through the tension like a razor. "Mr. von Hesse," she began, meeting his condescending gaze without blinking, "your proposed acquisition of Moreau DuPont is overvalued by at least 18%. Your projections ignore the upcoming union strikes in France and the volatility of lithium prices impacting their fleet. Your plan is a liability. My counter-proposal, which is already on your tablets, outlines a path to acquiring them at a realistic valuation, after they are weakened by the strikes, saving this company nearly $1 billion. The boardroom was stunned into silence. In one sharp, data-driven strike, she had dismantled a senior member's strategy and asserted her dominance. Cormac Kensington leaned back, a proud, wolfish grin spreading across his face. The Queen had arrived. That day set the tone for her new life. Audrina's leadership was transformative. The quiet librarian who had observed the world from the sidelines became a CEO who saw everything. She led Kensington Global into a new era of sustainable technology and ethical innovation, her empire growing far beyond what her grandfather had built. She never saw Preston or Bianca again, though their story became a cautionary tale whispered in the Hamptons. Ruined and drowning in debt, their sham marriage dissolved within a year, leaving them as footnotes in the story of her rise. Sometimes late at night in her office overlooking the glittering city, Audrina would think of the woman in the simple gray dress, standing alone under a spotlight of humiliation. She didn't pity her, she respected her. That woman's quiet endurance had forged the steel in her own spine. Preston's greatest mistake was never seeing the Queen in his midst. That blindness cost him everything, and in turn it gave her an empire. What a journey of deception, humiliation, and ultimate world-shaking vindication. Audrina's story is a powerful reminder that the quietest people often have the most formidable strength, and that underestimating someone can be the most expensive mistake you'll ever make. It's a tale where the underdog didn't just win. She rewrote the entire game, proving that true power isn't about the name you carry or the money you have, but about the unshakable character you build when no one is watching. What would you have done if you were in Audrina's shoes? Would you have walked away, or would you have unleashed the storm? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were captivated by this story of epic revenge and empowerment, please hit that like button, share this video with friends who love a triumphant ending, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more incredible true-life dramas that will leave you breathless.